the boy they tried to humiliate, but his music spoke louder than hate. At the prestigious Ridgeway Academy, a private school nestled in the wealthiest district of New Haven, Connecticut, appearances spoke louder than character, and lineage often trumped actual talent. In this polished palace of privilege, one quiet boy was never supposed to shine. But one mocking gesture, a cruel joke, disguised as an opportunity, set off a chain of events that would change not just his life, but the entire institution. That boy's name was Caleb Morgan. Caleb was small for his age, a slender African-American boy who rarely spoke unless directly addressed. He lived with his grandmother, Loretta Morgan, in a cramped, two-bedroom house in the crumbling Bellwood district. The roads there were littered with potholes, and the air always carried a faint scent of burnt oil. Loretta had raised Caleb alone since his mother died of cancer when he was just 4. His father had vanished long before that. Though poor in possessions, Caleb was rich in one thing: his love for music. His sanctuary was an old, upright piano in their damp basement, gifted to Loretta by a former employer who had intended to throw it out. The keys were yellowed and uneven, but to Caleb, they were portals to another world. Every evening after school, Caleb would descend the creaking basement stairs and play. It was how he survived the chaos outside and the silence inside. It was how he remembered his mother, how he connected with his grandmother. Music wasn't just a hobby, it was his identity. And then, one rainy afternoon, everything changed. Loretta came home holding a letter. It was crumpled, damp, but its words were clear. Caleb had been awarded a full scholarship to Ridgeway Academy, a school so exclusive its students arrived in luxury cars driven by bodyguards. The scholarship was part of an experimental outreach program meant to bridge opportunity gaps. But at Ridgeway, such gestures were often more about optics than inclusion. Caleb didn't celebrate. He wasn't sure what to make of it. But Loretta, tears streaming down her face, held his hands and whispered, "Baby, this is your door. Don't be afraid to walk through it." On his first day at Ridgeway, Caleb wore a too-small button-up shirt and thrift store slacks. His shoes were clean but scuffed. He clutched a second-hand backpack and walked the marble halls in quiet awe. The students stared. Whispers followed. A few laughed openly. In room 3B, he took a seat near the back. The teacher, Ms. Danvers, didn't introduce him. She pointed and moved on. That was the tone for the weeks that followed. Caleb became invisible to the teachers and hyper-visible to the students. The leader of the ridicule was Parker Winslow, tall, blue-eyed, born into a restaurant dynasty, and raised on flattery. Parker mocked everything from Caleb's shoes to the sandwich he brought for lunch, always drawing laughter from his entourage. But Caleb said nothing. He responded the only way he knew how, by enduring. And then came Principal Stratton. Leonard Stratton had ruled Ridgeway for 2 decades. Always in a custom suit, silver hair perfectly combed, his handshake calculated and his smile deceptive. To the school board, he was a model leader. But to the underprivileged students, he was a quiet storm of sabotage, a gatekeeper of elite culture dressed in progressive language. One afternoon, as Caleb sat alone under a maple tree during lunch, Stratton approached. "Do you play any instruments?" he asked, his voice smooth. Caleb looked up, startled. "Piano. A little." Stratton smiled, eyes narrowing. "Fascinating." The next morning, during homeroom, Ms. Danvers made an announcement that stunned the class. At Principal Stratton's request, Caleb Morgan will open the Winter Talent Showcase with a piano performance. Silence. Then laughter. Parker led the chorus. "Oh, this is going to be great," he said, clapping mockingly. "We're going to open with the musical stylings of Goodwill Mozart." Caleb sat frozen. He wasn't being honored. He was being set up. That afternoon, he walked home slower than usual. But when he opened the door and saw Loretta's tired eyes light up at the thought of him performing on stage, something inside him shifted. "I'm going to play," he told her quietly that night. "But not for them. For us." The days that followed were intense. Every evening, Caleb retreated to the basement and poured every ounce of his soul into the keys. Loretta sat nearby, never interrupting, occasionally wiping her tears as his melodies grew stronger, more confident. Meanwhile, Stratton worked behind the scenes, fueling the mockery. He whispered to teachers and influential parents that Caleb's act would be an inspiring little segment, intentionally patronizing. His goal was to remind everyone of the school's social order. The night of the performance arrived. The auditorium glowed with chandeliers. Rows of wealthy families filled the seats. Stratton stood near the stage, smug. Parker and his friends smirked in the front row. Backstage, Caleb trembled. But when he peeked through the curtain and saw Loretta seated front and center, dressed in her best, her eyes filled with belief, his hands steadied. The lights dimmed. "Ladies and gentlemen," the announcer declared, "please welcome our opening act, Caleb Morgan." Scattered claps. Then silence. Caleb walked onto the stage alone. He sat at the piano, and he played. The first notes were soft, tentative. Then came the crescendo. Within seconds, the room was transformed. Gone was the judgment. In its place, the music spoke of struggle, of loneliness, of hope. His fingers moved with the grace of a seasoned virtuoso, each note cutting through the layers of bias that had buried him for so long. When the final chord hung in the air, silence fell. Then came the applause. It started slowly, then built, then erupted. People stood. They clapped until their hands hurt. Even Parker's mouth hung open. Even Stratton paled. Caleb stood, bowed once, and walked off the stage not with pride, but peace. That night, nothing at Ridgeway was the same. The next day, Caleb wasn't invisible. Students nodded. Teachers smiled. Ms. Kendrick, the reserve music teacher, pulled him aside. "I sent a video of your performance to the National Conservatory," she said. "They want to invite you to audition." Caleb's eyes widened. "You deserve it," she added. "And more." Stratton, meanwhile, panicked. The performance had derailed his control. Parents began asking questions. Teachers began whispering. He retaliated quietly, attempting to cancel a new event. Ms. Kendrick proposed, "Voices of Ridgeway, a multicultural music showcase." She refused to back down. When Stratton shut down the event, the students revolted. They held it outside, under string lights and cold stars, using portable speakers and folding chairs. Caleb played again that night, and this time, it was a protest, a declaration that Ridgeway belonged to every student. The performance went viral. Local news picked it up, and within weeks, Stratton received a letter. He was under investigation for misconduct. Emails, records, testimonies. Ms. Kendrick had it all. One by one, the stories poured in. Miguel Torres, forced to transfer. Jenny Lee, silenced despite winning writing awards. The mask fell. Stratton resigned in disgrace. Ms. Kendrick took his place. Scholarships expanded. Arts programs flourished. The cultural committee opened to everyone. Caleb became its youngest member. A few months later, Caleb received his formal acceptance to the National Conservatory. Full scholarship. At the end-of-year ceremony, he performed one final time for Ridgeway. When the last note faded, he stood to a thunderous ovation. He looked down. Loretta was smiling through tears. Ms. Kendrick clapped proudly. And Caleb Morgan, once the boy they tried to humiliate, had become the name everyone now remembered as the one who changed Ridgeway Academy forever. The audition that shook the city, Caleb's next chapter. The day Caleb Morgan left Ridgeway Academy behind, the air smelled different. It was lighter, filled with possibility. He stood outside the gates one last time, a small suitcase in one hand and Loretta's warm fingers wrapped around the other. The scholarship letter from the National Conservatory of Music was tucked safely inside the inside pocket of his blazer, worn but clean and pressed. This wasn't just a journey to a new school. It was the first page of a new book. The conservatory sat on a hill overlooking the skyline of Charleston, South Carolina, a grand campus filled with centuries-old stone buildings and echoing concert halls. Its students were prodigies, protégés, and polished performers raised on discipline and applause. Caleb arrived with his head high, his heart steady, but his fingers slightly trembling. He wasn't used to rooms like this. the marble halls, the perfectly tuned Steinways, the language of theory thrown around like breath. He felt like a whisper among shouts. But just as he had done at Ridgeway, Caleb didn't flinch. He listened, observed, learned, and when he played, it was never to impress, it was to express. That was what caught the attention of Professor Adrian Keller. Keller, a former concert pianist turned reclusive genius, hadn't taken a new student under his wing in over a decade. But after hearing Caleb play Chopin with aching rawness in a placement audition, he requested to see him privately. In his office, a dim room, stacked with yellowing manuscripts, Keller sat silently after Caleb finished. "You don't play music," he finally said. "You speak through it." That was how Caleb earned his place in Keller's masterclass, a tight circle of 7 students, all older, all exceptional. It was the highest honor at the conservatory, but also the highest pressure. And that's where the real story began. Because in that rarefied circle, the social politics were more intricate than Ridgeway ever was. Caleb wasn't just the only black student. He was the only one from poverty. Most of the others had grown up with private tutors, international competitions, and family names engraved on campus buildings. The standout among them was Natalia Rivers. Gifted, cold, a daughter of legacy. Her father had funded the newest wing of the conservatory, and her reputation was untouchable. At first, she ignored Caleb. Then came the winter showcase. Each student in Keller's class was to perform an original arrangement. When Caleb's turn came, he played a reimagined version of Gershwin's Rhapsody in Blue, laced with subtle gospel chords and undertones of sorrow. The audience, faculty, alumni, city dignitaries sat breathless. When the last note fell, silence hovered like reverence. Then applause. Not polite applause, thunder. Natalia clapped, too, but not with her hands, with her vengeance. The very next week, rumors began to spread. Whispers in practice halls. Accusations that Caleb had used an outside arranger. A faculty member received an anonymous email questioning the authenticity of his composition. A theory instructor, secretly connected to Natalia's family, began failing Caleb in his written assignments. He knew what this was. It wasn't about plagiarism. It was about making sure he didn't climb too high. When Professor Keller caught wind of the sabotage, he demanded a formal investigation, and that's when the story exploded. The conservatory tried to handle it quietly, but one of the students, a violinist named Jonah from Chicago, leaked the story to the press. He had seen Natalia's private messages mocking Caleb's background, calling him the scholarship experiment gone rogue. Within days, local news picked it up. Gifted black student targeted by elites at Charleston Conservatory. It was Ridgeway all over again, but on a national stage. But Caleb had changed. He wasn't the silent boy from Bellwood anymore. In a surprise move, he agreed to give an interview. Not with anger, not with bitterness, but with truth. "I don't need to tear anyone down," he said calmly. "I just want to be given the space to rise." The interview went viral. Within 48 hours, prominent musicians, including an award-winning pianist who had grown up in public housing, publicly backed Caleb. Support poured in from around the country. But the greatest moment came 2 weeks later. The conservatory's board, under pressure, agreed to host a public recital in which Caleb would perform his original piece and the audience would judge for themselves. It was held at Charleston City Hall. Standing room only. Caleb wore a black suit that Loretta had saved for, stitched and hemmed by hand. As he sat at the grand piano beneath the old chandelier, he looked out and saw faces of every background, color, and class unified by music. He closed his eyes. He played, and the city listened. Every note was a declaration of pain, of joy, of survival, of dignity. When the piece ended, there were tears. People stood. The mayor embraced him on stage. Even Professor Keller, usually stoic, wiped his eyes. Natalia? She left before the applause began. In the weeks that followed, the conservatory issued a formal apology. The theory instructor was quietly dismissed. Natalia took a leave of absence. And Caleb? He was invited to perform at the Kennedy Center. National Public Radio requested an interview. And Loretta? She watched it all from her living room, holding the same photograph of Caleb's mother she had clutched the night he was born. "I told you," she whispered. "Your music would change things." Caleb would go on to graduate top of his class, earning invitations to perform internationally. But no matter how far he traveled, he always returned to Bellwood, holding music workshops, funding youth programs, and restoring that old piano in the basement where it all began. He didn't just become a musician. He became a movement. Because sometimes the loudest voice isn't the one that shouts. It's the one that plays through pain and rises anyway.